There we go. Okay, Chumash Rashi, the Torah portion. Behaalotecha, second reading. Let's get right into it. We are in by the book of Numbers, chapter 8, verse 15. So we're in the midst of the Levites being taken as uh, the exchange for the firstborn, that they will be doing the work of the sanctuary. All right, let's continue. So yesterday we were in, the Levites put their hands on the offerings. And there was the wave offering, and that they're separated from amongst the Israelites to be there for God, meaning in divine service. Right. Well, let's see. Okay. And after this service, inauguration, I guess, if you will, the Levites will come to serve as Oyel the tent of meeting. And you shall purify them, and you shall lift them as a wave offering. Because given, like they're given over, Hema, them, Li to me, B'toy Israel, amongst uh, the Israelites. Tachas, what are they? Why are they given over? Because they are tachas in the stead of, in the place of, Pitras kol rechem, the opening of every womb, Bechor of every firstborn, kol rechem, kol. Oh, that's interesting. Because it says the word kol there twice. Bechor, kol. Oh, every opening of the womb, all of the first opening of the womb, kol rechem of every womb, bechor kol mibnei Israel, every firstborn from the Israelites, akachti oisam li, I have taken them. Right. It's a funny wording of the verse. So the Levites are in the place of all the firstborns, right? That's the verses saying. Nesuni, Surashi, Nesuni, Nesunim, given, Nesunim Lamasa. What's the double words? They're given for the transportation, right? That they have to transport the sanctuary, the, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Nesunim led shir, and they're also given over for song, right? They had the duty of also singing. It's interesting. For the Mishkan, it was only singing, I think. But for the base of English, they also played instruments. They sang and played instruments. That was their job, right? As opposed to the Kohanim, that they do the service with the offerings. Kili kol b'chor b'minei Yisrael, because to me, so it continues now the verse, right? Because for all of the firstborn of the Israelites are mine. Ba'adam and behema, in human and animal. But when did it become mine? On the day that I smote Kol B'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim, all the firstborns in the land of Egypt. V'yikdashti oisam li, and I sanctified them to me, which means, that they were saved. Right. So Rashi in 17, Kili Kol B'chor, for me all the firstborns. Shali Hayo B'cheiris, the firstborns are mine. V'kavadin, in other words, from the line of justice, they belong to me. That's why. Shehi Ganti Aleim, because I shield them, from to distinguish them from the firstborn of the Egyptian, and I took them to me, until they aired with the golden calf, and now and now I took the Levites in their stead. Okay. I'm not certain what this verse is coming to say. We learned this, I think, yesterday already. If not even before, this idea that the firstborn was sanctified by God because God protected and saved them from the plague. And that when they erred with the golden calf, they lost that privilege of being God's holy ones to serve, and that was transferred to the Levites. So it seems to me that that's repeated a couple of times already. I don't know what the nuance and distinction is. I'm not certain if there's a sikh on this from the Rebbe, but anyways, interesting to point out. And I took the Levites, tachas kol b'chor b'bnei Israel, in the stead of every firstborn of the Bnei Israel, of the Israelites. And I placed and gave the Levim nesunim la'arim. They're given over to Aaron or Levanav and his sons. Right, they're the Kohanim. Right, so they're they're there to help them. Israel, from the midst of the Israelites, to do the service, to serve the service of the Israelites in the Oyel Ma'id. What does that mean, that to serve? Olachaper al b'nei Israel. In other words, they're helping that which Aaron and his sons are doing, right, from us to perform for the Israelites. Right, the Kohanim are doing the performing for the people, made in the tent of meeting, l'chaper al b'nei Israel, and to atone for the Israelites, right there, to atone for them, right, by the offerings. But you have b'nei Israel negative. And that in order that there should not be amongst the Israelites a negev, a plague, Geshes b'nei Israel, when they will come close to b'nei Israel, el HaKodesh, to the sanctuary. I don't know if I read this perfectly correct on who it's making reference to. I think we're going to need Rashi over here in 19. Not only need Rashi, we have him. And I gave וגאמר, 5 פעמים נאמר בבני עשו, במקרה זה. In this verse it says Bnei Israel 5 times. Look at the verse number 19. Bnei Israel, 1 time, 2 times Bnei Israel, 3 times Bnei Israel, 4 times Bnei Israel, 5 times. Well, I didn't even pick it up. See, we needed Rashi. I didn't pick it up. Look at the verse in 19. 5 times it says that the Bnei Israel, the Israelites, or the children of Israel, if you will. The child who's learning Chumash and Rashi, and he knows the literal translation. Bnei Israel means the children of Israel. So he asks, where are all the adults? We're only speaking about the children. So, so it says 5 times. Like this to show how dear they are to God. They mention their name repeatedly, but in one single verse, which is why 5? That's the number of the 5 books of Torah, right? We're in the 4th book of Bamidbar, Numbers. So I saw interpreted in the Bereshis Rabbah. Okay. Negev, and there will not be a plague amongst the children of Israel. So they should not need to approach the sanctuary because if they do approach Negev, there will be a plague. Funny language from Rashi. Okay. Like it's a funny, in order that they don't need to come close to the holy. What do you mean don't need? They shouldn't, right? Because the Israelis can't do the service. I mean, they don't need. That's a funny language. I wonder if there's something on that. Follow the question I have? Okay. Yes, Moshe and Aaron, and they did, Moshe and Aaron, the Choladas in Israel, and the entire assembly of the Israelites, the Levim, to the Levim, Kichol Asher Tziva Hashem, in accordance to everything that God commanded, it's Moshe to Moshe, the Levim, for the Levites. And also, so they did, Lahem in Israel, the Bnei Israel. Yas Moshe Aaron. What's this talking about? What do they do exactly over here? Rashi Moshe and Midam Aaron Hinifam. Ah, okay. So he explains what did they do? Okay, we have to remember from what we learned in the past. So Rashi says because so we shouldn't make a mistake because so everybody did for the Levites. Moshe did, Aaron did, and the Israelites did. What did they do exactly? So Moshe, he had them stand before God, right? That's what we learned yesterday in yesterday's verse. And Aaron, he nifam, and Aaron lifted them with the wave offering. And that was a big job. Israel, and if you remember, we learned it was yesterday, right? We learned that he called all the Israelites to come um, and lay their hands on them, on the Levim, on the Levites, um, not just the firstborn, all of them, to sort of like place of, empower them. Why that was needed, I'm not certain. Okay, sorry, verse 21. Okay, these Chatu Halevim, and the Levim, the Levites became purified. These Chatu Halevim, they purified themselves. V'chamsu bigdeim, and they uh, cleansed their clothing, meaning that it went to the mikvah. V'yanayif Aaron Oisan, and Aaron made a wave offering, Tanufa Lifnei Hashem before God, a wave offering before God. V'yichaper Aleihim Aaron Latahara, and Aaron atoned for them to purify them. Doesn't mean he atoned for them. Rashi doesn't say anything. Okay, in what manner? Is the wave offering an atonement? That's what it sounds like. An atonement for what? Remember, they were replacing the firstborn. What do they need an atonement for? Right? They weren't involved in the sin of the golden calf. All right. Moving right along. Okay, 22, and afterwards, Woa Levim, and the Levites came, Lavi, the Sabaydosam, to serve their service, their divine service, Voyamayid, in the tent of meeting, Lifnei Aaron, and before Aaron, Lifnei Banav, and before his sons, right? Kasher Tziva Hashem, as Hashem had commanded Moshe, Levim, concerning the Levim, Kain also Lahem, so they did to them. So they did to them. Rashi, interesting. Kashetziva Hashem, so as Hashem commanded, so they did. Lahagit Shevach, why is it saying? Same we already Ha'oisim, of those who acted, Moshe, Aaron, and the Israelites, Hanasim by him, and those who acted upon the Levites, She'echem Eim La'ikiv, that not one of them resisted. In verse 20, it already said that they did, that they carried out the command. Now it's being repeated. So Rashi is saying is that they did it, and here it's saying they did it, but they could have done it with resistance. You know, I'm just surmising, this is my thought, that people don't appreciate that someone becomes, has a greater position than them. That's not necessarily something that people appreciate. There could be a jealousy. Right. The Levites were chosen, they were, okay, there's a reason for it and so on, but still, you got chosen and not me. So therefore the verse is telling us no one resisted, no one, they weren't jealous. They understood and they accepted, totally. So the fact that they did it doesn't mean they did it, happily. That's verse 20 that they did it. Now verse 22 is telling us they didn't resist. In other words, there was no protest. I don't know what. Okay. Interesting translates here. No one protested, right? You wake up in the morning and placards and, try to block traffic. They didn't do that. Wow. Very interesting. It's having a discussion with someone about what's going on with the protests and so on. People protest um, for so-called victimhood of the Palestinians. So this person was saying to me, they're just jealous that Jews are successful. If there's anybody who would be the ultimate victim of the Jewish people, what we've gone through, but yet we don't play the victim card and we are successful, and they're just jealous, right? So here, they could have been the victim. Listen, you know, what do you want from us? We're a victim of I don't know, whatever. Find a lot of reasons to consider yourself a victim. But they didn't. They didn't protest. They didn't resist. They accepted. Praise. All right. Interesting. Okay, now we continue. Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, Zeis, this. Asher the Levim, that is for the Levites, from 25 years of my land upwards, they should come into the service. In serving in the tent of meeting. Anybody have a problem over here? You should. Next verse says, from 50 years you return, you retire. Right? But we learned previously it was from 30 to 50. Now it says 25 to 50. Right? That this is the time frame of the service of the Levites. So Rashi picks up on this. Rashi 24. And this is to the Levites. In other places, it says 30 years, right? And two parshas ago, in chapter 4, verse 3, in 2 weeks ago, we had that teachings. So what is it? Is it 25 or 30? Why is there a discrepancy? So he explains that 25 years old, they come to study the laws of the temple service. And you learn for 5 years. Right? You got to graduate from all the teachings. And when you become actually 30, you then start your service. Because from here, we see in the Talmud, this teaches us something as a general principle. What is it? That if a student did not see a good sign, success in his study for 5 years of trying, you're not going to see. In other words, learning Torah is not going to be your thing. Not that you shouldn't learn, but in other words, if you're sitting 5 years in a yeshiva and you don't see success, then, right? So that's a side point that the Torah is teaching. Now, why Rashi says that, seemingly like what's the, it's a nice homiletic understanding of the verse, but not the simple meaning of the verse. The simple meaning of the verse is 5 years you come to study. Finished. Why does Rashi add to it? Oh, from here we learn that if you study for 5 years and you're not successful, then you're not going to see success afterwards. In other words, it is what it is. Excuse me, one second. Need some water. Sorry. Baruch atah. All right. You follow my question? In other words, I'm not questioning the what you learn from the verse. I'm questioning why Rashi adds that to the simple understanding of the text. Simple understanding of the text is, why is there a variance between what we learned earlier, 30 to 50, and here it's 25? So tell you that you have to come at 25 to come and learn the laws and everything that you need to do to then be competent by the age of 30. And that's it. What are you coming and saying that it's from there we learn that any student means any student not coming as a Levite, any student that's coming to yeshiva and they study for 5 years and they are not successful, their study is, 5 years is the limit to see your success. Okay. Anyways. And at 50 years, Shuv Yashuv, he should return, meaning retire, he translates of him, mitzvah from the work. How about mitzvah, but from the troop, right? Mitzvah is like army, right? It means a troop, right? How about the troop of work? And don't work anymore, right? 50, retirement from this work. Okay. 25, Rashi, don't work anywhere. So he says, don't work any longer. So he says that's from the carrying stuff of a chazer, but he does return. The Nila Sha'arim, locking the gates of the temple, Lashir to sing, the Tanagolas to load the wagons. This is what's meant when the following verse is that you meaning with your brothers, Kitar Gumbai. So Rashi is saying, okay, so this verse is continuing to the next verse. Visheras, and the next verse, so it continues. And they serve es echab. They have to serve. Emphasis. The S is their brothers. But their brothers meaning the Kohanim, right? So we just said that they're retired, and now they must go serve. But in the 10th meeting, lishmar mishmeres to keep the charge. But the the service you must not perform. So it doesn't mean you're serving. So you must deal with the Levites regarding their charge. Rashi 26. Lishma Mishmeres is safeguard. The camp around the hill, Lahakim to set up, to dismantle, Bishasam Asais, time of travel. However, they still got to do this. They got to serve their brothers. Keep the safeguard. What's the safeguard? Watch a tabernacle, like meaning that no Israelite should come, and cross the line of service. And the other tasks that are necessary to do to set up and dismantle the right. It's the heavy lifting at 50 they can't do anymore. That's right. How Rashi learns. Interesting. I wonder if all the commentaries learn that way. So the law is that way, but interesting. Okay, let's take a few moments we have. Let's see. Okay, so in verse 25, 26, these last two verses, okay. So Rashi said that, carrying on their shoulders, that service they don't do anymore, right? The heavy loading, heavy carrying, but they do go to close the gates, to sing, and to put things into the wagons. And that's what it means in the following verse that they serve their brothers. together with their brothers. So we need to understand. So Rashi brings the words. Look over here. He brings us the lo yavoidoi, that they don't do any more work, right? So, and he's modifying that the work is only not to carry the heavy stuff, right? His explanation, why is he then bringing other things in here? His explanation is on the words not to work anymore. Right. So to go and opening the gates and to sing and to load the right, that's got nothing to do with these words that he's coming to explain. Not to work anymore. So just say not to work anymore is not to, means just not to carry on your shoulders the heavy stuff. Right. That's what it means when the Levites turn 50. But the fact that they do other things, that's on its place. That's in the next verse, in verse 26, where it says that they must serve their brethren. What does it mean they must serve their brethren? It means da, right? Is that clear about the question? Yeah? Diane, Andrew, everybody else? Clear? Oh, got a lot of people over here learning with us right now. It's clear. Okay. Online? Everybody?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So the Rebbe says, the words in verse 26, right, that they have to serve their brothers is answering a difficulty that arises because of the words that they shouldn't serve anymore. Okay, what does that mean? Rashi says that they go back and they close the gate and they sing. So the commentators ask on Rashi, that when they reach 50 years old, the Levites, right, that's what we're speaking about, right? They do come back to sing, but they don't come to play an instrument. This needs to be understood. To upload the wagons and to close the gates. Right? That seemingly you need a lot more strength, right? To upload the wagons. What did they put in the wagons, if you recall? Right? What was carried by the shoulder was like the arain, the candelabra, right? All the holy vessels, they were taken by hand, right? They had poles and they were taken by hand. Fine. That's heavy load. We get that. But to play an instrument is not a heavy load, as opposed to loading up the wagons, which the wagons, you had the long planks that were 15 feet high. They were heavy that were loaded into the wagon. So if they were still to do, because they were to take apart um, the sanctuary, right, the Mishkan, and to load it and to put it back up, well, that's a lot more difficult than playing instruments, right? And if you notice, Rashi says they only came back to sing, right? Not play instrument though. So why wouldn't they play an instrument? Why is that a difficulty? Right? But loading the wagon they could do. So that's a problem that Rashi has. So to answer this, that's why he says, that's why Rashi and says in this Rashi in 25 that they have to serve with their brothers, with their brothers. Interesting. Make sure I got this clear. So since it says with their brother that they have to serve, it means something that is a collective thing as opposed to something that is an individual thing. Song, song is a collective voice, like one voice. Instrument, though, because you're all doing the same thing, singing, right? But instrument, there's different instruments, and therefore brings a uniqueness of each instrument, individuality. And here, the whole point of what they have to do, is not to have their individuality after 50, right? So there's 2 points here. There's the strength that you need and the individuality. So the individuality, they lose that by 50, and therefore they don't play the instrument, but song they do. And also and loading stuff also is not something that brings out an individuality. It brings out the collective whole, meaning when the heavy stuff they had to carry together. So um, it wasn't something about individual powers. Maybe, and this fits in. The Yeah, it wasn't about individual powers. It was about joining together. And for whatever reason, I'm not clear, but the verse is saying that the individual powers of the individual ends at 50. For I don't know why he's not explaining it over here. Right. Ends at 50, and what you're left with, right? And that's because that's what it means in these words. Visharis is echad, as Rashi brings out, that serve his brethren, meaning the Kohanim. Actually, it may not mean just his, it might mean all of Israel. How do they serve? When they're serving means about something greater than you that you become a part of. So that's what they have to do. The verse is saying not the individual uniqueness of the person, which an instrument will bring out, even though an instrument you're playing as a collective, orchestra, which is true. But each one has their specialty, their uniqueness that makes them stand out, right? When the drummer does his drum solo, all eyes are on him and he's special, right? But in singing, everybody's singing together, right? No one's singing a solo. That doesn't happen. Um, so since the service is now of a unity, a togetherness, so therefore that's what Rashi's bothered by these words that will exclude. That's why he brings it over here to give us an understanding that what does it include and not include. So it'll only be song, not instrument. It'll be the loading of the loading, because the loading is also a collective job that's done. And opening the gates is also, it's got to be done by two people or more. Opening the gates, as the gates were, quite large and challenged. Wow, that was interesting. Now, why that is, I'm not certain, but that's what the verse is saying, and that's what Rashi's picking up. Rashi doesn't, necessarily have to give us the reason why the verse is saying that after 50, the individuality is not what is important, but the collective whole in the Levite's divine service. But that's what the verse is saying. Okay, very interesting. See you shortly. Bye, Tanya.